"What the hell do you think you're doing with my children?" Marcus Bennett's voice cracked like thunder through the kitchen. His hands trembled. His face went white as ash. The file he'd been carrying crashed to the marble floor, papers scattering everywhere. But nobody moved to pick them up, because in front of him something impossible was happening. His 4-year-old twins, the boys who hadn't smiled in 3 years, who flinched at every touch, who the doctor said might never connect with the world, were dancing, laughing, their small feet stomping against the floor, while a woman he barely knew held their hands and spun them in circles. Marcus felt his knees buckle. This couldn't be real. Before we continue, if you want to see how this incredible story unfolds, please subscribe to our channel and stay until the very end. And comment below, tell us which city you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The call came on a Tuesday morning, and it changed everything. Marcus Bennett sat in his corner office on the 47th floor of Bennett Technologies, staring at a contract worth $800 million. His pen hovered above the signature line. His assistant had knocked 3 times already, reminding him that the board was waiting. But Marcus couldn't move. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was Mrs. Patterson, the 5th housekeeper in 2 years. "Mr. Bennett, I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore." Marcus closed his eyes. "What happened?" "Lucas bit me again. And Liam, he just stares, sir. He stares at me like I'm not even there, like I'm a ghost." Her voice cracked. "I've worked with difficult children before, but these boys... I'm sorry. I just can't." The line went dead. Marcus set the phone down slowly. His chest felt tight, the familiar pressure that came every time another caregiver walked out the door. Every time someone confirmed what he already knew. His sons were unreachable. He'd spent millions on specialists, flown in experts from Boston, London, Tokyo. They came with their charts and their therapies and their carefully managed expectations. They used words like profound hearing loss and developmental delays and limited prognosis. What they meant was, give up. Marcus hadn't given up. He'd done something worse. He'd stopped trying. He signed the contract without reading it and told his assistant to cancel his afternoon meetings. The drive home took 40 minutes. Marcus spent every second of it dreading what waited for him. The Bennett mansion sat on a hill overlooking the San Francisco Bay, a sprawling testament to everything money could buy. 23 rooms, a staff of 12, a garden that had won architectural awards, and 2 little boys who lived like prisoners inside it. Marcus found them in the living room, sitting in their usual spots. Liam by the window, Lucas curled in the corner of the couch. Neither looked up when he entered. Neither acknowledged his presence at all. "Hey, boys," Marcus said softly. Nothing. He crouched down in front of Liam, reaching out to touch his shoulder. The boy flinched violently, pulling away, his small body pressing against the glass. Marcus withdrew his hand like he'd been burned. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though he knew Liam couldn't hear him. "I'm so sorry." He stood there for a long moment, watching his sons exist in their separate silences, and felt something inside him die a little more. That night, Marcus called the agency again. "I need someone new," he said flatly. "Tomorrow, if possible. Mr. Bennett, with all due respect, you've gone through 5 housekeepers in... I'm aware of the number." His voice was cold. "Just send someone who won't quit after a week." The agency representative hesitated. "There is one candidate. She doesn't have formal training with special needs children, but her references are exceptional. She's from Louisiana, worked her way through... I don't care about her life story. Can she start tomorrow?" "Yes, sir. Her name is Grace Thompson." Marcus hung up without saying goodbye. He didn't know it yet, but that phone call had just changed the course of his entire life. Grace Thompson arrived at 7 in the morning, carrying a single suitcase and wearing a yellow dress that seemed almost offensive in the gray solemnity of the Bennett mansion. She was 28 years old, with warm brown skin and eyes that seemed to hold secrets Marcus couldn't begin to guess. When she smiled, it transformed her entire face. Marcus didn't smile back. "The children are in the playroom," he said, his tone businesslike. "They have a strict schedule. Meals at 8, 12, and 6. Therapy sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They don't respond well to sudden movements or loud noises. Grace nodded, listening carefully. And Miss Thompson... Marcus paused, his jaw tightening. Don't try to connect with them. They don't respond. The specialists have made that very clear. Just keep them safe. Keep them fed. That's all I ask. Something flickered in Grace's eyes, something that looked almost like defiance. I understand, Mr. Bennett, she said quietly. But she didn't understand. She didn't agree. And she had no intention of following his instructions. The first week was observation. Grace moved through the mansion like a gentle breeze, learning its rhythms, its silences, its secrets. She watched the twins from a distance, noting everything. She noticed how Liam always positioned himself near windows, his small hand pressed against the glass like he was reaching for something beyond it. She noticed how Lucas rocked back and forth when stressed, his fingers tapping patterns only he could understand. She noticed how both boys flinched when touched, but leaned slightly toward warmth, a sunbeam, a heated blanket, the residual heat from a cup she'd just set down. Most importantly, she noticed their feet. When the washing machine ran in the distant laundry room, Lucas's heel would tap against the floor. When the refrigerator hummed, Liam's toes would twitch. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Grace saw it. They could feel vibrations. And where there were vibrations, there was a doorway. On her 8th night in the mansion, Grace sat alone in her small room and opened her laptop. She searched for videos on American Sign Language, watching them over and over, her hands mimicking the movements. Happy, she signed to her reflection, her fingers clumsy but determined. Sad. Play. Love. She practiced until her hands cramped, then practiced some more. Marcus Bennett thought his sons were unreachable, but Grace Thompson had grown up in a house full of people who communicated in ways the world didn't understand. Her grandmother had raised 3 deaf children with nothing but music, touch, and stubborn love. The specialists might have given up on Liam and Lucas. Grace was just getting started. 2 weeks into her employment, Grace made her move. It was a Thursday afternoon. Marcus was locked in his study as usual, hiding from a house that reminded him of everything he'd lost. The twins sat at the small table in the kitchen, picking at their lunch with no interest. Grace watched them for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small Bluetooth speaker. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was against every rule Marcus had given her. If it failed, she'd be fired by sundown. But if it worked, she pressed play. Aretha Franklin's voice spilled into the room, warm and alive. The song was Respect, and it filled the kitchen with its irresistible rhythm. Grace began to move. She swayed her hips first, just a little, finding the beat. Then her shoulders joined in her arms, lifting her whole body, coming alive with the music. She didn't look at the boys directly. She just danced, like she was alone, like no one was watching. 10 seconds passed. 20. And then Lucas looked up. Grace kept dancing, her heart in her throat. Lucas's brow furrowed, confusion and curiosity mixing on his small face. His heel began to tap against the chair leg. Tap, tap, tap. Oh my God, Grace thought. He feels it. Liam turned next, drawn by his brother's movement. He watched Grace spin, watched her feet move across the floor, and something shifted in his eyes. Then Lucas giggled. The sound was small, almost swallowed by the music, but Grace heard it. A giggle. Real, spontaneous, alive. She kept moving, exaggerating, now making her movements bigger, sillier. She spun in a circle, her braids flying, and clapped her hands twice. Lucas slid off his chair. Grace's breath caught, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop now. Lucas stood on unsteady legs, his small body swaying, trying to find the rhythm that was vibrating through the floor and into his feet. His movements were clumsy, awkward, completely offbeat. But he was moving. He was trying. Liam watched his brother for a moment, then slid off his own chair, determined not to be left behind. He stomped his feet once, twice, his face scrunched in concentration. Grace dropped to her knees, bringing herself to their level. She took Lucas's small hands in hers and guided them side to side, dancing together. He resisted for a moment, then relaxed, his eyes widening with something Grace had never seen in them before. Joy. Liam tugged at her skirt, demanding attention. Grace freed one hand and took his, and suddenly all three of them were swaying together, a clumsy trio in the middle of the kitchen, and the room was filled with something it hadn't held in years. Laughter. The boys laughed, really laughed, high-pitched, breathless, pure. Grace's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. She kept moving, kept guiding, kept believing. "That's it," she whispered, though she knew they couldn't hear her words. "That's it, babies. You feel it, don't you? You feel it." Lucas tried to spin like Grace had, nearly falling, but she caught him, steadying him. He laughed harder, the sound bouncing off the walls. Liam clapped his hands, trying to match the beat, and when he succeeded, even for a moment, his face lit up with pride. For 4 years, these boys had been locked in silence. For 4 years, everyone had told them they couldn't connect, couldn't feel, couldn't reach the world around them. But here they were dancing in a kitchen, laughing like the children they'd never been allowed to be. Grace was so focused on the boys that she didn't notice the figure in the doorway. She didn't see Marcus standing there, frozen, his face pale as death. She didn't see the file slip from his hands, papers scattering across the floor. She didn't see the tears streaming down his face. Marcus couldn't move. He had come downstairs for a file he'd left on the counter. A simple errand. 30 seconds in and out. But now, 30 seconds had become an eternity, and everything he thought he knew about his sons was crumbling before his eyes. They were dancing. His boys, the ones who flinched at touch, who never smiled, who existed in their own unreachable world, were stomping their feet and clapping their hands and laughing, laughing. When was the last time he'd heard that sound? Had he ever heard it? Lucas's head was thrown back, pure joy on his face. Liam clutched Grace's hand like a lifeline, giggling every time she spun him. And at the center of it all was this woman, this stranger who had done in 2 weeks what specialists couldn't do in 4 years. Marcus's chest cracked open. Something inside him, something he'd kept locked away since the day Sarah died, came flooding out. Hope. Terrible, dangerous, devastating hope. He wanted to move, wanted to step into the room, to drop to his knees, to pull his sons into his arms and never let go. But fear held him back. Fear that if he moved, the moment would shatter. Fear that if he spoke, the laughter would stop. Fear that this was just an illusion, a trick of grief and desperation. So he stood there silent, watching the impossible. The song ended. Grace looked up, finally noticing him in the doorway. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. The twins kept bouncing still, riding the high of the music, but Grace was frozen, waiting for his reaction. Marcus opened his mouth. No words came out. Grace slowly straightened, keeping her hands on the boy's shoulders, protective instinct taking over. She didn't know what to expect. Anger, gratitude, dismissal. What she got was silence. Marcus bent down, picked up his scattered papers with trembling hands, and walked away without a word. Grace watched him go, confusion and hurt mingling in her chest. She had just given him a miracle, and he couldn't even acknowledge it. But she didn't know what was happening inside Marcus Bennett. She didn't know that he was walking to his study, closing the door and sobbing like he hadn't sobbed since the day he buried his wife. She didn't know that her simple act of dancing had torn open wounds he thought had scarred over long ago. She didn't know that everything was about to change. The next morning, Marcus found Grace in the kitchen before the twins woke up. She was preparing breakfast, humming softly, and she didn't turn when he entered. But her shoulders tensed just slightly enough for him to notice. "Miss Thompson." His voice came out harder than he intended, sharper, like a blade. Grace set down the spatula and turned to face him, her expression calm but guarded. "Mr. Bennett, what exactly do you think you're doing with my children?" The accusation hung in the air. Grace didn't flinch. "I was giving them joy," she said simply. "They deserved that." Joy. Marcus stepped closer, his jaw tight. "They don't need joy. They need therapy, structure, professional intervention. What you did yesterday wasn't treatment. It was reckless." Grace's eyes flashed. but her voice stayed steady. "With respect, Sir Joy isn't reckless. It's the only thing they've been starved of in this house. You don't know what they need. You're not a specialist. You're not a therapist. You're a housekeeper." "I know," Grace replied quietly. "I'm just a housekeeper. I don't have degrees or certifications, but I have eyes, Mr. Bennett. And what I see are two little boys who are desperate to connect. They're not unreachable. They've just been reaching out to a world that refused to reach back." Marcus's hands curled into fists. The specialists gave up." Grace cut him off, her voice rising now, passion breaking through her composure. "They looked at your sons and saw a diagnosis, a case study, a limited prognosis." She stepped toward him close enough that he could see the fire in her eyes. "I look at them and I see children. Children who can feel music through the floor. Children who laughed yesterday for maybe the first time in their lives. Is that reckless to you?" Marcus stared at her, speechless. No one talked to him like this. Not his board members, not his lawyers, not anyone. He was Marcus Bennett. His word was law. But this woman, this housekeeper from Louisiana, was standing in his kitchen, challenging everything he believed about his sons. "You're overstepping." He finally managed his voice weaker than he wanted it to be. "Maybe I am." Grace didn't back down. "But someone had to." They stood there, the tension crackling between them, neither willing to yield. Finally, Marcus turned away. "Just don't get their hopes up," he said quietly, almost pleading. "Don't make promises you can't keep." He walked out before Grace could respond. She watched him go, her heart pounding, and wondered what kind of pain could turn a father into a stranger to his own children. That night, Grace made a decision. If Marcus Bennett wasn't going to fight for his sons, she would. She stayed up until 2 a.m. studying sign language videos, practicing until her fingers ached. She learned the signs for simple words, first food, water, yes, no, then moved on to the ones that mattered most. Happy, sad, play, love, family, papa. She wrote notes in a worn notebook, sketching hand positions, memorizing the way fingers moved through air to create meaning. She had no formal training, no credentials, no authority. But she had something the specialists didn't have. She believed. The days that followed were a quiet revolution. Grace introduced the signs slowly, never forcing, always inviting. During breakfast, she would sign eat before placing food on the table. When she gave them juice, she signed drink. When they played with blocks, she signed play. At first, the boys just watched, their eyes following her hands with curiosity. Then Liam tried. It happened on a Thursday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Grace had arrived. She was stacking blocks with the boys, signing more each time she added one to the tower. Liam watched her hands intently. Then slowly, his small fingers lifted and tried to copy the shape. It was clumsy, imperfect, barely recognizable, but it was intentional. Grace's heart stopped. She wanted to scream, to cry, to pull him into her arms and never let go. Instead, she kept her composure, smiled warmly, and signed yes with exaggerated enthusiasm. Liam's face transformed. Pride bloomed in his eyes, real, unmistakable pride. He signed more, again more confidently this time, and knocked the block tower over with his other hand, giggling at the crash. Lucas, not wanting to be outdone, pushed his own hands forward, trying to mimic his brother. Within an hour, both boys could sign more. It was just one word, one tiny word in a language they were only beginning to learn. But to Grace, it was everything. She didn't tell Marcus, not because she was hiding it, but because she wasn't sure he'd believe her, wasn't sure he'd care. The man moved through his own house like a ghost, avoiding his sons, avoiding her, avoiding everything that reminded him of what he'd lost. But Grace saw him sometimes standing in doorways, watching from a distance, with an expression she couldn't quite read. Pain, longing, fear. He wanted to connect with his children. She was certain of it. He just didn't know how. A week later, Grace did something that would change everything. She was tidying the living room after the boys had gone to bed, moving books back to shelves, straightening cushions. Her hand brushed against something on a high shelf, a silver frame thick with dust. She pulled it down carefully and wiped the glass with her sleeve. The photograph took her breath away. A younger Marcus smiled up at her, his face open and happy in a way she'd never seen. Beside him stood a woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile, her hand intertwined with his, Sarah. Grace had heard about her in whispered conversations among the staff, the wife who died giving birth to the twins, the loss that had turned Marcus Bennett from a man into a machine. She looked at the photograph for a long time, feeling the weight of grief that filled this house. Then she made a decision. Instead of returning the frame to its hidden spot, she placed it on a lower shelf eye level for two small boys. They deserved to know their mother's face. The next morning, Grace was in the kitchen when she heard Lucas make a sound she'd never heard before. Not a laugh, not a cry, something like a gasp. She rushed to the living room and found both boys standing in front of the photograph, their small faces pressed close to the glass. Liam's finger traced the woman's face over and over like he was trying to memorize it. Lucas just stared, his eyes wide and unblinking. Then Liam lifted his hands. Grace's heart stopped. His fingers moved slowly, forming a shape she recognized instantly, a shape she had taught him just days ago. Mama. The sign was imperfect, childish, barely formed, but it was unmistakable. Grace dropped to her knees beside them, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, sweetheart, that's your mama. Lucas turned to her, his eyes wet with tears he didn't understand, and tried to copy his brother's sign. Mama. Both boys signed it now, over and over, their small hands reaching toward a woman they would never know. Grace gathered them close, holding them as they grieved a loss they couldn't name, and felt her own tears streaming down her face. She didn't hear Marcus enter the room. She didn't see him freeze in the doorway, his face going white as he watched his sons sign a word he'd been too afraid to teach them. She didn't hear the strangled sound that escaped his throat, but she heard what came next. What have you done? Grace looked up sharply. Marcus stood there trembling, his eyes fixed on the photograph. They found her, Grace said softly. They knew before I said anything, Mr. Bennett. They knew. You had no right. His voice cracked. You had no right to. They deserved to know their mother existed. Grace stood slowly, positioning herself between Marcus and the boys. They deserved to see her face, to know she loved them. She's dead. Marcus's voice exploded through the room, raw and broken. She's dead, and nothing I do will bring her back, and every time I look at them... He stopped, choking on words he couldn't finish. Grace waited. The silence stretched between them, broken only by Lucas's soft whimpering. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. Every time I look at them, I see her. I see what I lost. I see everything I can never have again. Grace felt her heart break for him. They're not reminders of death, Mr. Bennett, she said gently. They're proof she lived. They're her legacy. They're everything beautiful she left behind. Marcus stared at her, his walls crumbling, his defenses failing. And then Liam turned around. He looked at his father, really looked at him maybe for the first time, and lifted his small hands. Mama. He pointed at the photograph, then he pointed at Marcus, and then with heartbreaking clarity, he signed a word Grace hadn't even taught him yet. Papa. It came out as a question, a plea, a desperate reaching toward a father who had never let himself be reached. Marcus's knees buckled. He caught himself on the doorframe, his whole body shaking as his son asked him a question 4 years in the making. Are you my papa? Are you here? Are you real? Grace stepped back, giving them space, her hand pressed to her mouth. Marcus lowered himself slowly to the floor until he was eye level with his son. Liam waited, his small hands still raised, hope and fear warring on his face. Marcus lifted his own hands. They shook so badly he could barely control them. He didn't know the signs, had never bothered to learn them, but he tried anyway. His fingers fumbled through something that might have been yes, or might have been nothing at all. But Liam understood. The boy launched himself forward, wrapping his arms around his father's neck, clinging to him with a desperation that shattered what was left of Marcus's composure. Lucas followed a moment later, joining the embrace, and Marcus Bennett, billionaire Titan ghost, held his children for the first time in 4 years, and wept. Grace slipped quietly from the room, leaving them to their moment. She had done what she came to do, the rest was up to him. But as she walked to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The walls were coming down, and nothing in the Bennett mansion would ever be the same. The embrace lasted for what felt like hours. Marcus knelt on the cold floor, his sons pressed against his chest, their small bodies warm and trembling. He couldn't remember the last time he'd held them like this, couldn't remember if he ever had. Liam's fingers gripped his shirt so tightly the fabric stretched. Lucas buried his face in his father's neck, making soft sounds that might have been words, might have been cries, might have been everything he'd been holding inside for 4 years. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak. He just held on. When the boys finally pulled back, their faces were wet with tears they didn't understand. Liam looked at him with an expression Marcus had never seen before, not fear, not distance, but something raw and open and desperately hopeful. The boy lifted his hands again. "Papa." This time it wasn't a question. Marcus's throat closed. He tried to respond, tried to form words, but nothing came out. So he did the only thing he could think of. He pressed his palm flat against his chest, then pointed at Liam, then at Lucas. It wasn't sign language, it wasn't anything official. But Liam smiled, and Marcus felt something shift inside him. Something that had been frozen for years began to crack. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over, his son's arms around his neck, the weight of their small bodies against his, the way Liam had smiled at him like he'd just discovered something precious. For 4 years, Marcus had convinced himself that his children were better off without his involvement, that his presence only reminded them of what they'd lost, that the specialist knew better that distance was kindness, that protecting his heart was the same as protecting theirs. He'd been wrong, so terribly, devastatingly wrong. At 3 a.m, he found himself standing outside Grace's door. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it, raised it again, lowered it again. What would he even say? "Thank you, I'm sorry." "Please don't leave." He turned and walked back to his room, the words still trapped inside him. But something had changed, and there was no going back. The next morning, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He came down for breakfast. Grace was already in the kitchen helping the boys with their cereal. She looked up when he entered, surprise flickering across her face before she masked it with polite neutrality. "Mr. Bennett?" "Grace." It was the first time he'd used her first name. She noticed. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't comment. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down at the table, across from his sons, in full view. Liam stopped eating his spoon frozen halfway to his mouth. He stared at his father with wide eyes, like he wasn't sure this was real. Lucas looked between his brother and his father, confusion evident on his face. Marcus's heart pounded. He didn't know what to do, didn't know how to be a father. The distance had become comfortable, familiar. This closeness felt terrifying, but he stayed. He picked up a piece of toast and took a bite, trying to look casual, trying to look like this was normal. Grace watched the whole scene unfold, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. She signed something to the boys. Marcus didn't understand it, but both twins immediately relaxed. Lucas went back to his cereal. Liam kept watching his father, but the tension in his small shoulders eased. "What did you say to them?" Marcus asked quietly. "I told them Papa is happy this morning," Grace replied. Marcus swallowed hard. "Am I?" Grace looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know, Mr. Bennett. Are you?" He didn't have an answer, but for the first time in 4 years, he wanted to find one. The days that followed were a revolution in slow motion. Marcus started coming down for every meal. He watched Grace teach the boys new signs, memorizing them from a distance, practicing them alone in his study when no one could see. He learned good morning first, then eat, Then, drink. On the fourth day, he worked up the courage to use one. Liam was reaching for a glass of juice when Marcus leaned over and signed "drink" before handing it to him. Liam froze. His eyes went wide. He looked at the glass, then at his father's hands, then at his father's face. For a horrible moment, Marcus thought he'd done something wrong, made a mistake, frightened his son. Then Liam's face split into the biggest smile Marcus had ever seen. The boy grabbed the glass with one hand and his father's fingers with the other, squeezing tight, bouncing in his seat with excitement. Marcus couldn't breathe. His son was holding his hand, voluntarily, happily. Lucas, seeing his brother's reaction, immediately pushed his own glass toward their father, signing "drink" with exaggerated enthusiasm. Marcus laughed. The sound surprised him. It came out rough and unused, like an engine that hadn't been started in years. But it was real. Grace turned away quickly, but not before Marcus saw her wiping her eyes. That night, for the first time, Marcus tucked his sons into bed. He didn't know what he was doing. He'd never done it before, not once in 4 years. The nannies handled bedtime, the housekeepers, the specialists, anyone but him. But tonight he wanted to try. He sat on the edge of Liam's bed, his hands clasped awkwardly between his knees, searching for the right thing to do. Liam watched him with those serious eyes waiting. Marcus lifted his hands and signed "sleep," the way he'd seen Grace do it earlier. Liam nodded. Then before Marcus could move, the boy reached up and touched his father's face. Just a gentle brush of small fingers against his cheek. Marcus's eyes burned. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to Liam's forehead. Then he crossed to Lucas's bed and did the same. Both boys were asleep within minutes. Marcus sat in the chair between their beds for over an hour, watching them breathe, wondering how he'd missed so much time, wondering if he could ever get it back. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of small miracles. The boys grew bolder every day. They no longer flinched when Marcus entered the room. They didn't retreat to corners or refuse to meet his eyes. Instead, they ran to him, tugged at his hands, demanded his attention with the relentless enthusiasm only children could muster. Marcus learned more signs. Play. Happy. Sad. More. Each one felt like a key unlocking a door he'd kept sealed for too long. Grace watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. She never took credit, never pointed out that none of this would have happened without her. She just kept teaching, kept encouraging, kept believing. But Marcus knew. He knew exactly who had given him his sons back. One evening, after the boys were asleep, he found her in the kitchen, washing dishes. "Grace." She looked up surprised to see him there so late. "I wanted to thank you," he said, the words coming out stilted and formal. "For what you've done. For the boys. For everything." Grace dried her hands slowly. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Bennett. They did the hard work. All I did was show them the door. You did more than that." Marcus stepped closer. "You believed in them when I couldn't. When I wouldn't." He paused, struggling with words that didn't come naturally to him. "I was so afraid of failing them that I stopped trying. You showed me how cowardly that was." Grace's expression softened. "You're not a coward. You're a grieving father. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." She held his gaze. "Cowards run away forever. You stopped running. That takes courage." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, something warm, something dangerous. He cleared his throat and stepped back. "Well, thank you. That's all I wanted to say." Yet he left before he could say anything else, before he could admit that it wasn't just gratitude he was feeling. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning. Marcus had scheduled a progress evaluation with Dr. Richard Coleman, the pediatric neurologist who had been following the twins since birth. He wanted validation, scientific proof that the changes he was seeing were real. He wanted someone with credentials to confirm what his heart already knew. Dr. Coleman arrived at 10 o'clock, carrying the same leather briefcase he'd brought on every visit, wearing the same calm, clinical expression. "Mr. Bennett, I have to say when you called I was surprised. You've never requested an evaluation outside our regular schedule before." "Things have changed," Marcus said. "The boys have made progress, significant progress." Dr. Coleman raised an eyebrow. I see. Well, let's have a look, shall we? They gathered in the living room. Grace sat with the twins on the floor, helping them with a puzzle. Both boys were animated, signing to each other, occasionally making sounds that approximated words. Marcus watched Dr. Coleman's face, searching for a reaction. The doctor observed for several minutes, making notes on his pad. Interesting, he murmured. Marcus's heart rate spiked. They're communicating, using sign language. Real intentional communication. Liam knows over 30 signs now. Lucas is catching up. Dr. Coleman didn't look up from his notes. Marcus frowned. Did you see that Lucas just asked his brother for a piece? That's interaction. That's connection. I see children playing, Mr. Bennett. Playing and communicating. Dr. Coleman finally looked up. His expression was patient, condescending, exactly the way it had been at every appointment for the past 4 years. Mr. Bennett, I don't want to diminish your enthusiasm. It's clear you're emotionally invested in your son's development, and that's admirable. But I have to be honest with you. Marcus's stomach dropped. About what? Children often mimic gestures. It's called echolalia in verbal development, and there's a gestural equivalent. What you're interpreting as meaningful communication may simply be imitation, pattern recognition. It doesn't necessarily indicate the kind of breakthrough you're hoping for. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. That's not true, he said, his voice rising. They're not just mimicking. They're initiating conversation. They're asking questions. They're responding to questions. That's not imitation, that's language. Dr. Coleman sighed. I understand this is difficult to hear, but I've been working with special needs children for 30 years. I've seen parents project meaning onto behaviors that aren't truly meaningful. It's a coping mechanism, understandable, but ultimately counterproductive. Marcus turned to Grace, desperate. Tell him, show him what they can do. Grace stood slowly, her face tight with restrained emotion. She knelt beside the boys and signed something. Liam looked up at the doctor. His small body tensed. Liam, Grace signed. Can you show Dr. Coleman the sign for happy? Liam's hands lifted, then dropped. His eyes darted between the doctor's stern face and his father's anxious one. He didn't sign. Come on, buddy, Marcus urged, his voice cracking. Show him, like you showed me. Lucas began to whimper, picking up on the tension. He buried his face against Grace's shoulder. Liam shrank back, his eyes filling with confusion and fear. The room fell silent. Dr. Coleman closed his notebook with a soft snap. This is exactly what I mean, Mr. Bennett. When put under any kind of pressure or scrutiny, the behaviors disappear. Real developmental progress is robust. It doesn't evaporate under observation. Marcus couldn't breathe. I'm not saying there has been no improvement. The doctor continued, his tone gentle but firm. Clearly, the boys are more comfortable in their environment. But I'd caution you against interpreting emotional bonding as cognitive breakthrough. False hope can be damaging for you and for them. The words echoed in Marcus's head. False hope, false hope, false hope. Everything he'd felt over the past weeks, the joy, the connection, the belief that his sons were finally reaching him, crumbled like ash. He'd been fooling himself, just like before. Nothing had really changed. Dr. Coleman gathered his things and offered a sympathetic smile. I'll see myself out. Try not to be too discouraged, Mr. Bennett. Progress with children like yours is measured in years, not weeks. Keep your expectations realistic, and you won't be disappointed. The front door closed behind him with a click that sounded like a gavel falling. Marcus stood in the middle of the living room, his whole body trembling. Grace touched his arm. Mr. Bennett! He pulled away violently. Don't! His voice was ice. His eyes, when he turned them on, her burned with something terrifying. This is your fault. Grace stepped back. What? You made me believe. The words came out like venom, like he was spitting poison from his tongue. You and your dancing and your songs and your signs. You made me think they were changing. You made me hope. They are changing, Grace insisted. What you saw in there that wasn't them. They were scared. Children freeze when they're put on display like that. They froze because there's nothing there. Marcus exploded. There's nothing. There never was. You showed them some tricks, taught them some gestures, and I was stupid enough to think it meant something. Grace's face went pale. You don't believe that. I believe what I just saw with my own eyes. I believe a doctor with 30 years of experience over a housekeeper with 2 weeks of internet research. The cruelty of the words hung in the air. Marcus saw the impact in Grace's eyes, the flash of hurt, the wounded dignity. But he didn't stop. You've been giving them false hope, he continued, his voice shaking. And worse, you've been giving it to me. Do you have any idea what that does? Do you have any idea what it's like to believe just for a moment that things might be different and then have it torn away? Grace's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I have never given them anything false, she said, her voice breaking. What I gave them was love. Real love. The kind that shows up every day, even when it's hard, even when there's no guarantee of reward. That's not false. That's the only thing that's true. It's not enough. It's everything. Grace stepped toward him, her hands balled into fists at her sides. You want to know what's false? This. She gestured around the room. This mansion full of silence. This life where you pay other people to raise your children because you're too terrified to do it yourself. That's false. That's the lie you've been living for 4 years. Marcus's face contorted with rage. You don't know anything about my life. I know you lost your wife and you never recovered. I know you look at those boys and see her face and it breaks you every time. I know you've been so busy protecting yourself from pain that you forgot they were in pain too. Get out. The words dropped like stones. Grace stared at him. What? I said get out. You're fired. Pack your things and leave by morning. Marcus, don't. His voice cracked. Don't say my name like you have the right to. You came into my house, disrupted my children's routine, filled everyone's head with fantasies, and now you want to pretend you belong here? You don't. You never did. Grace stood motionless, tears streaming silently down her face. In the corner of the room, Lucas began to wail. Liam clutched his brother, his eyes wide with terror, not understanding the words but feeling the violence in the air. Grace looked at the boys, then back at Marcus. Fine, she whispered. I'll go. But remember this moment, Mr. Bennett. Remember what you chose. Remember what you threw away. She crossed to the boys and knelt down, gathering them close. She signed something Marcus couldn't see, couldn't understand. Both boys clung to her, their small bodies shaking with sobs. Then she stood, wiped her face, and walked out of the room without looking back. Marcus watched her go. The silence that followed was absolute, and somewhere deep inside him, beneath the rage and the fear and the shame, a voice whispered that he had just made the worst mistake of his life. That night, the mansion felt like a tomb. Marcus sat alone in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The boys were in their room, finally asleep after hours of crying. He could still hear the echoes of their sobs in the walls. He'd done this. He'd taken their joy and crushed it, taken the one person who had reached them and thrown her away. And for what? Because a doctor told him to be realistic, because hope was too dangerous, because believing hurt too much. He set down the glass and opened the drawer. The letter was still there, the one he'd written to Sarah 2 weeks after her death, the one he'd never sent. He unfolded it with trembling hands and read the words he'd written in the darkest moment of his life. I don't know how to do this without you. I'm not strong enough. I'm not good enough. Every time I look at them, I see what I stole from them by failing to save you. They deserved a mother. They got me instead. And I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry. Tears blurred his vision. He'd written those words 4 years ago, and nothing had changed. He was still the same broken man, making the same mistakes, pushing away everyone who tried to help. Sarah would be ashamed of him. She had been the brave one, the one who believed in people who saw potential where others saw limitations. She would have been the mother those boys needed. Instead, they got a father who was too wounded to try. Marcus folded the letter and stood. He walked to Grace's door and knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. Slowly he opened the door. The room was empty. The closet stood open bare. The suitcase was gone. She had already left. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, his chest heaving, his eyes burning. He was too late. He'd pushed her away and she'd gone, just like everyone else, just like Sarah. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, and for the first time since his wife's funeral, Marcus Bennett wept. Not for Sarah, not for himself, but for the woman who had shown him what love looked like and whom he had driven away. The hours passed in silence. Marcus didn't move from the floor outside Grace's empty room. He sat there as the sky lightened, as the birds began to sing, as the house woke up around him. At 7 in the morning he heard footsteps, small footsteps, unsteady, approaching. He looked up. Liam stood at the end of the hallway, still in his pajamas, his face swollen from crying. He stared at his father with an expression that broke Marcus's heart. The boy lifted his hands, where Grace Marcus's throat closed. He didn't know how to answer, didn't know how to explain what he'd done. Liam waited, his small hands frozen in the air. Then Lucas appeared behind his brother, rubbing his eyes, equally lost. Both boys looked at their father. Both boys asked the same silent question. "Where is she? Why did she go? What happened?" Marcus forced himself to stand. His legs felt like lead. His heart felt like it was being crushed in a vice. He walked toward his sons, knelt down, and pulled them into his arms. They didn't resist, but they didn't melt into him either. Their bodies were stiff, uncertain, waiting. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, though he knew they couldn't hear him. "I'm so sorry." Liam pulled back and signed again. "Grace, come back." Marcus looked into his son's eyes and saw the hope there, the desperate, fragile hope that the woman who had changed everything might return. He thought about lying, thought about saying yes just to make the pain stop. But he couldn't do it. He shook his head slowly. Liam's face crumpled. Lucas, seeing his brother's reaction, began to cry again, and Marcus held them both, feeling their pain, knowing he had caused it, knowing he had no one to blame but himself. In that moment, something inside him broke. Not the way things had broken before, not with anger, not with walls, not with distance. This was different. This was surrender. He had spent 4 years protecting himself from loss, and in doing so, he had lost everything that mattered. His wife was gone. He couldn't change that. But Grace was still alive, still in the world somewhere, still believing in things he had been too afraid to believe in. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe he could find her. Maybe he could make this right. Marcus stood up, his son still clinging to his hands, and made a decision. He was done running. He was done hiding. Whatever it took, he was going to bring her back. Marcus moved fast. By 8 o'clock that morning, he had called the agency that had sent Grace. The phone rang 6 times before someone answered. "Bennett Household Staffing, how may I help you?" "I need Grace Thompson's contact information, now." There was a pause. "Mr. Bennett, I'm afraid we can't provide personal information about our—" "I don't care about your policies." Marcus's voice cut like a blade. "I need to reach her. It's urgent." "Sir, Miss Thompson is no longer employed through our agency. When she left your residence, she terminated her contract with us as well. We have no current contact information." Marcus's blood ran cold. "What do you mean you have no information? You placed her with me. You must have an address, a phone number, something." "The number we had on file has been disconnected. The address was a temporary residence she vacated 2 months ago. I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett. There's nothing more I can tell you." The line went dead. Marcus stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. She was gone, really gone. Not just from his house, but from every trail he might have followed. Liam tugged at his pants leg, signing frantically, "Find Grace! Papa, find Grace!" Marcus looked down at his son's desperate face and felt something crack inside him. "I'm trying, buddy," he whispered. "I'm trying." The next 48 hours were a blur. Marcus hired a private investigator. Cost was irrelevant. He gave the man every piece of information he had. Grace's full name, her age, her background in Louisiana, the yellow dress she'd worn on her first day. "That's not much to go on, Mr. Bennett." "Then work harder." He called in favors from business contacts, had his legal team run background checks, sent his assistant to every address connected to Grace Thompson in the Bay Area. Nothing. It was like she had vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, the twins deteriorated. Without Grace, the light that had filled the house went dark. Liam stopped signing. He sat by the window for hours, staring out at nothing. His small hand pressed against the glass like he was waiting for someone who would never come. Lucas regressed further. He refused to eat. He wouldn't make eye contact. He rocked back and forth in his chair, humming tunelessly, retreating into the silent world he'd lived in before Grace had pulled him out. Marcus watched his son slip away and felt powerless to stop it. On the third night, he found Liam standing in the kitchen at 2 a.m. The boy had pulled Grace's old Bluetooth speaker from a drawer and was clutching it against his chest like a lifeline. His eyes were red from crying. Marcus's heart shattered. He knelt down slowly, trying not to startle his son. "Liam." The boy looked at him with an expression that held no hope, no expectation. Just emptiness. "I know you miss her," Marcus said softly. "I miss her too." Liam's hands moved slowly, forming signs Marcus had to struggle to understand. "She gone because Papa angry." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "Yes," Marcus admitted, his voice breaking. "She left because I was angry, because I was scared, because I made a terrible mistake." Why Papa scared Marcus didn't know how to answer. How do you explain adult fear to a 4-year-old? How do you confess that you were so afraid of hoping that you destroyed the best thing that ever happened to your family? "Because I forgot how to be brave," he finally said. "Your mama was the brave one. When she died, I think my bravery died with her." Liam considered this for a long moment. Then he signed something that made Marcus's breath catch. "Grace brave. Grace teach Papa." Out of the mouths of babes. Marcus pulled his son into his arms and held him tight, the speaker pressed between them, the ghost of music lingering in the air. "You're right," he whispered. "She did teach me, and I threw it all away." On the 5th day, the private investigator called. "I found something, Mr. Bennett. It's not much, but it's a lead." Marcus's heart lurched. "Tell me." "Grace Thompson has a grandmother in Louisiana, Baton Rouge. She's the emergency contact Grace listed on her original employment application. The grandmother's name is Rosalie Thompson. I have an address." Marcus grabbed a pen. "Give it to me." 10 minutes later, he was on the phone with his pilot. "I need the jet ready in an hour. We're going to Louisiana." "Oui, sir." Marcus looked at his sons, still fragile, still broken, but watching him with something that might have been hope. "All 3 of us." The flight took 4 hours. Marcus spent every minute of it rehearsing what he would say, how he would apologize, how he would beg if necessary for a second chance he didn't deserve. The twins sat quietly strapped into their seats, watching their father with wide eyes. They didn't understand where they were going, but they understood that something important was happening. When the plane landed in Baton Rouge, Marcus rented a car and drove straight to the address the investigator had given him. It was a small house on a quiet street, nothing like the mansions Marcus was used to. The paint was peeling in places. The garden was overgrown, but there were flowers in the window boxes and wind chimes on the porch, and something about the place felt alive in a way his own home hadn't felt in years. Marcus sat in the car for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. What if she wasn't here? What if she refused to see him? What if he'd come all this way for nothing? Liam unbuckled his seatbelt and signed impatiently. "Go. Papa, go." Marcus took a deep breath. He got out of the car, lifted both boys into his arms, and walked toward the front door. His knock echoed in the humid afternoon air. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he heard footsteps. The door creaked open. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes sharp and assessing. She looked at Marcus, then at the twins, then back at Marcus. "You must be the billionaire," she said flatly. Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry. My granddaughter told me about you." The woman's voice carried no warmth. "She told me about those precious boys too, and she told me what you did." Marcus swallowed hard. "Mrs. Thompson. It's Miss Thompson. Never married, never saw the point." She crossed her arms over her chest. "You have some nerve showing up here, Mr. Bennett. I know I do, but I need to speak with Grace. Please. Why? So you can hurt her again? No. Marcus's voice cracked. So I can apologize. So I can tell her she was right about everything. So I can beg her to come back. Rosalie's eyes narrowed. She studied him for a long moment, reading something in his face that he couldn't hide. You love her, she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The words stuck in his throat like stones. Rosalie shook her head slowly. Lord have mercy. You don't even know it yet, do you? Before Marcus could respond, a voice came from inside the house. Grandma, who's at the door? Marcus's heart stopped. Grace appeared behind her grandmother, and the moment she saw him, the color drained from her face. Marcus? Grace. Her name came out like a prayer. The twins exploded. Liam and Lucas squirmed out of their father's arms and launched themselves at Grace with desperate cries. They clung to her legs, her waist, anything they could reach, their small bodies shaking with sobs. Grace dropped to her knees and gathered them close, tears streaming down her own face. Oh, my babies, my sweet babies, I'm here, I'm right here. Marcus watched the reunion, his chest so tight he could barely breathe. He saw the way his sons melted into her embrace, the way they signed grace and love and stay over and over again, the way she kissed their foreheads and whispered promises against their hair. This was what family looked like. This was what he had almost destroyed. When Grace finally looked up at him, her eyes were red, but her expression was guarded. What are you doing here, Marcus? I came to bring you home. She laughed bitterly. Home, you threw me out of your house. You called everything I did an illusion. You told me I didn't belong. I was wrong. Yes, you were. Marcus took a step forward. Grace, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I have no right to ask for anything. But the boys... Don't. Grace's voice hardened. Don't you dare use those children as a bargaining chip. They're not leverage. They're not tools to manipulate me into coming back. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. The words he needed, the honest, vulnerable, terrifying words, were trapped somewhere deep inside him, and he didn't know how to get them out. Rosalie watched the standoff with knowing eyes. After a moment, she reached down and gently extracted the twins from Grace's arms. Come on, little ones. Grandma Rosalie has cookies in the kitchen. Let's let the grown-ups talk. The boys resisted at first, but Rosalie's calm authority eventually won. She led them inside, leaving Grace and Marcus alone on the porch. The silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Say what you came to say, Grace finally demanded. Then go. Marcus's hands trembled at his sides. I was afraid. Of what? Of everything. The admission cost him more than she knew. Of hoping. Of believing things could be different. Of letting myself love them, really love them, only to lose them the way I lost Sarah. Grace's expression flickered, but she didn't speak. When that doctor told me I was seeing things that weren't there, it confirmed every fear I'd been carrying for 4 years. It gave me permission to stop trying, to go back to the safe distance where I couldn't get hurt. Marcus's voice broke. But there is no safe distance. I was hurting every single day. I was just too proud to admit it. So what changed? They asked for you. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. The morning after you left, Liam came to me and signed Where's Grace? And I realized that I had taken the one person who made them feel safe, the one person who reached them when no one else could, and I had driven her away. Because I was scared. Because I was selfish. Because I would rather be alone than risk being broken again. Grace's facade cracked. She turned away, but not before Marcus saw her own tears falling. You hurt me, she whispered. You said terrible things. I know. You made me feel like nothing I did mattered. It mattered. It mattered more than anything. Then why? Grace spun back to face him, her voice rising. Why couldn't you see it? Why couldn't you trust what was right in front of you? Because I don't know how to trust anymore. Marcus's composure shattered completely. Sarah was my anchor. She taught me how to believe in things, how to hope, how to love without fear. When she died, all of that died with her. I've been walking through the world like a ghost for 4 years, going through the motions pretending to be alive. And then you came. He stepped closer, close enough to see the tears glistening on her cheeks. You came into my house with your yellow dress and your music and your stubborn, beautiful faith, and you woke something up in me that I thought was dead. It terrified me, Grace. You terrified me. Grace stared at him, her chest heaving with emotion. I didn't come here to make you fall in love with me, she said quietly. I came here to help your children. I know, but you did both, and I was too much of a coward to admit it. The confession hung in the air between them. Grace closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had shifted in her expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to understanding. I need time, she said finally. I can't just come back like nothing happened. I know. And if I do come back, things have to be different. You can't hide in your office while I raise your children. You have to be present. You have to learn their language. You have to be their father. I will. How do I know that? How do I know you won't shut down again the next time things get hard? Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter. The one he'd written to Sarah 4 years ago. The one no one had ever seen. He held it out to Grace with trembling hands. Read this. Grace took the envelope slowly, her brow furrowing in confusion. She opened it, unfolded the paper, and began to read. Marcus watched her face as she absorbed his darkest confession. The fear that he wasn't enough, the guilt that he'd survived when Sarah hadn't, the desperate, aching love for sons he didn't know how to reach. When she finished, her hands were shaking. You've been carrying this for 4 years, every day, and you never showed it to anyone. You're the first. Grace looked at the letter, then at Marcus. Her expression held something he hadn't dared to hope for. Sarah would be proud of you, she said softly. Not for the money, not for the empire, for this, for coming here, for showing me this. Marcus's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down his face, and he didn't try to hide them. I'm not asking you to replace her, he choked out. I'm asking you to help me honor her, by loving the children she left behind, by teaching me how to be the father they deserve. Grace stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. That's all I ever wanted, Marcus. That's all I ever asked. He covered her hand with his own, and for a long moment they stood there together, the past and the future, meeting in the space between them. Inside the house, Rosalie watched through the window with the twins at her side. Is Papa crying? Liam signed. Rosalie smiled. Yes, baby, but sometimes tears mean something good. Grace didn't come back with them that day. She needed time, she said. Time to think, time to process, time to figure out if she could trust Marcus not to hurt her again. Marcus understood. He didn't like it, but he understood. He flew back to San Francisco with the boys, and the house felt emptier than ever. But something was different now. Something had shifted. He didn't retreat to his office. Instead, he sat on the floor of the living room surrounded by toys and books and blocks and tried to be present for his sons in ways he never had before. He learned new signs every day, practicing until his fingers ached. He read stories before bed, even though the boys couldn't hear his voice making exaggerated expressions and acting out the characters with his whole body. He danced. It felt ridiculous at first, a 40-year-old billionaire stomping around his living room trying to find the beat of a song his children couldn't hear. But when Liam and Lucas started giggling, started joining in, started moving their bodies in clumsy imitation of his clumsy movements, Marcus didn't feel ridiculous anymore. He felt alive. A week passed, then 2. Grace called every night to check on the boys. Marcus made sure to answer to give her updates, to tell her about every small victory and every frustrating setback. Liam learned the sign for airplane today, he told her one evening. He won't stop using it. I think he's trying to tell me he wants to fly back to Louisiana. Grace laughed, and the sound filled Marcus with warmth. And Lucas? Lucas ate all his vegetables at dinner. First time in weeks. That's wonderful. I miss you. The words slipped out before Marcus could stop them. We all miss you. Silence on the other end of the line. I miss you too, Grace finally admitted. All three of you. Then come home. Another long pause. Marcus held his breath. 2 more days, Grace said. Give me 2 more days. I need to take care of some things here. Whatever you need. And Marcus, yes, don't stop dancing. He smiled. I won't. On the 15th day, the doorbell rang. Marcus was in the kitchen attempting to make pancakes with the boys. There was batter everywhere on the counter, on the floor, somehow on the ceiling, and both twins were covered in flour. When the doorbell sounded, Marcus's heart stopped. He wiped his hands on his already ruined shirt and walked to the front door, his legs unsteady. He opened it. Grace stood on the porch, her suitcase at her feet, wearing that same yellow dress from the first day. Hi, she said softly. Marcus couldn't speak. Behind him he heard small feet pounding across the marble floor. Liam and Lucas appeared, their faces streaked with flour, their eyes going wide as they recognized the figure in the doorway. They screamed. Not the silent screams of before, but actual sounds, loud, joyful, unmistakable cries of pure happiness. They launched themselves at Grace, nearly knocking her over, clinging to her like they would never let go. Grace knelt down and wrapped her arms around them both, laughing and crying at the same time. I'm home, she whispered. I'm home, babies. I'm not going anywhere. Marcus watched the 3 of them, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. Grace looked up at him over the boys' heads. Well, she said, are you going to invite me in, or are we going to stay on this porch forever? Marcus stepped forward, reached down, and took her hand. Welcome home, he said. And for the first time in 4 years, he meant it. Grace settled back into the mansion like she had never left, but everything was different now. Marcus was different. He no longer disappeared into his office for hours at a time. He didn't watch from doorways or observe from a distance. He was in the middle of everything, learning alongside his sons, making mistakes, laughing at himself when the signs came out wrong. One morning, 3 weeks after Grace's return, he sat with the twins for their daily lesson. Okay, Grace said, positioning herself across from them. Today we're going to learn something special. Are you ready? Both boys nodded eagerly. Even Marcus leaned forward, curious. Grace lifted her hands and signed slowly, deliberately. I love you. She pointed at each of them as she repeated the phrase. I love you. I love you. I love you. Lucas copied her immediately, his small fingers forming the familiar pattern. Liam followed more carefully, wanting to get it exactly right. Then both boys turned to their father. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He lifted his own hands and signed the words he had never been able to say. I love you. Liam's eyes went wide. Lucas gasped. They had waited 4 years to see their father's hands form those shapes. 4 years of distance and silence and missed moments. And now finally, the wait was over. Both boys threw themselves at Marcus, nearly knocking him over, signing, I love you, over and over against his chest. Grace watched the scene with tears streaming down her face. This was what healing looked like. Not a single moment of transformation, but 1,000 small ones stacked on top of each other, building towards something beautiful. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Marcus found Grace in the garden. She was sitting on a bench looking up at the stars, her face peaceful in a way he'd rarely seen. He sat down beside her without speaking. For a long moment, they simply existed together in the quiet. Thank you, Marcus finally said. Grace turned to look at him. For what? For coming back, for believing in them, for believing in me even when I gave you every reason not to. Grace reached over and took his hand. You're a good man, Marcus Bennett. You just forgot for a while. How do you know I won't forget again? Grace smiled. Because now you have 2 little boys who won't let you, and you have me. Marcus squeezed her hand. I don't deserve you. Probably not. Her smile widened. But I'm here anyway. He laughed a real laugh, full and warm and alive. And somewhere in the house, he could have sworn he heard the echo of Sarah laughing with him. Maybe she could see them. Maybe she knew. Maybe, just maybe, she had sent Grace to them in the first place. Marcus didn't know what the future held, didn't know if he would make more mistakes, face more challenges, stumble over more obstacles. But for the first time in 4 years, he wasn't afraid. He had his sons, he had Grace, and he had something he thought he'd lost forever: hope. The months that followed were the happiest Marcus had ever known. Spring melted into summer, and the Bennett mansion transformed. Music played every afternoon. Laughter echoed through hallways that had been silent for years. The boys ran freely, signed enthusiastically, and made sounds that grew clearer with each passing week. Marcus had reduced his office hours to almost nothing. His board complained. His investors grumbled. His assistant quit from frustration. He didn't care. For the first time in his life, Bennett Technologies was not his priority. His sons were. Grace was. The family they were building together was everything. One evening in late July, Marcus found himself watching Grace read to the twins before bed. She didn't just read, she performed, her hands dancing through signs, while her face acted out every emotion, every character, every twist in the story. Liam and Lucas were mesmerized, and so was Marcus. When the boys finally fell asleep, Grace slipped out of their room and found him waiting in the hallway. "You're staring," she said softly. "I know." "Why?" Marcus stepped closer. "Because I'm trying to figure out how I got so lucky." Grace's breath caught. "Marcus, I spent 4 years convinced I would never feel anything again, that my heart died with Sarah, and there was nothing left but obligation and emptiness." He reached out and touched her face gently. "You proved me wrong." Grace leaned into his hand. "I wasn't trying to. I know you weren't. That's what makes it real." They stood there in the dim hallway, the air between them charged with something neither had acknowledged aloud. "I'm scared," Grace admitted. "I've never felt this way before, and you're my employer, and it's complicated, and I don't want you to be my employee anymore." Grace's eyes widened. "What?" "I want you to be my partner, in raising the boys, in building this family, in everything." The words hung between them like a promise. Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure this isn't just gratitude? Because I couldn't bear it if—" Marcus kissed her. It wasn't planned, wasn't calculated. He simply couldn't hold back anymore. When they finally pulled apart, Grace was trembling. "I'm sure," Marcus whispered. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Grace laughed through her tears. "You're impossible." "I know." She kissed him again. And somewhere in the house, if anyone had been listening, they might have heard the faint echo of wind chimes, the same kind Rosalie kept on her porch in Louisiana, like a blessing from far away. 3 months later, everything changed. It started with a phone call. Marcus was in the kitchen helping the boys with breakfast when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Dr. Richard Coleman. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. The man had done enough damage with his clinical pessimism and his charts and his carefully managed expectations, but something made him answer. "Mr. Bennett, I need to see you. Today, if possible." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Why?" "I've been reviewing the boys' files, and I've been following up on some observations from our last meeting. There's something you need to know." "Can you tell me over the phone?" "No, this needs to be in person." Marcus hung up, his appetite gone. Grace noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" "Coleman wants to see me. He says it's urgent." Grace's face paled. "About the boys." "He didn't say." They exchanged a look that held all the fear they'd learned to keep at bay, the terror that something was wrong, that the progress they'd celebrated was an illusion, that the other shoe was finally dropping. "I'll come with you," Grace said firmly. Marcus shook his head. "Stay with the boys. I don't want them sensing something's wrong." "Marcus, I'll call you as soon as I know anything." He kissed her forehead and left before she could argue. The drive to Dr. Coleman's office felt like a funeral procession. Marcus replayed every moment of the past months, searching for signs he might have missed. Had the boys been regressing? Had he been too optimistic, too blinded by hope to see what was really happening? By the time he arrived, his hands were shaking. Dr. Coleman met him in the waiting room personally, which only increased Marcus's dread. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Mr. Bennett. Just tell me what's wrong." The doctor gestured toward his office. "Please, sit down." Marcus didn't want to sit. He wanted to grab the man by his collar and demand answers. But he forced himself to stay calm, to lower himself into the leather chair across from Coleman's desk. The doctor pulled out a file, thick filled with papers and charts and medical jargon Marcus couldn't decipher. "After our last meeting, I couldn't shake something," Coleman began slowly. "The way the boys responded to Miss Thompson. The signs you described them making. It didn't align with what I expected based on their history." Marcus's heart pounded. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I may have been wrong." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "I ordered additional tests," Coleman continued. "Brain scans, audiological evaluations, developmental assessments. The results came back last week." He slid a document across the desk. Marcus picked it up with trembling hands. The medical terminology swam before his eyes. "In plain English, doctor, please." Coleman leaned forward, his expression the most human Marcus had ever seen it. "Your sons are not as limited as we believed. Their hearing loss is profound, yes, but their cognitive development, their capacity for language acquisition, their potential for connection, it's all far beyond what we projected." Marcus couldn't breathe. Couldn't. What we were seeing as regression or withdrawal was actually something else entirely. It was adaptation. They were waiting, Mr. Bennett. Waiting for the right stimulus, the right approach, the right person. "Grace," Marcus whispered. Precisely. What she instinctively understood the importance of vibration, of rhythm, of physical connection. It unlocked something in them that years of traditional therapy couldn't reach. Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. "So they're okay. They're really okay." Coleman smiled. It transformed his face. "More than okay. With continued support and the right environment, there's no reason Liam and Lucas can't develop age-appropriate communication skills, attend mainstream schools, live full and independent lives." The file slipped from Marcus's hands. He bent forward, his head dropping his shoulders, shaking with sobs he couldn't control. 4 years of fear, 4 years of guilt. 4 years of believing his sons were trapped in a world he could never reach. And now this. "I owe you an apology," Coleman said quietly. "I was so focused on managing expectations that I couldn't see what was actually happening. Miss Thompson saw it. You saw it. I was the one who was blind." Marcus looked up, his face wet with tears. "Thank you for admitting that, for telling me the truth." "Thank Miss Thompson. She's the real hero here." Marcus drove home in a daze. He kept replaying Coleman's words, afraid to believe them, afraid to hope even now. But when he walked through the front door and saw Grace sitting on the floor with the twins teaching them a new sign, something inside him finally let go. "Marcus." Grace looked up, alarmed by his expression. "What happened? What did he say?" Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides, dropped to his knees, and pulled all 3 of them into his arms. "They're okay," he choked out. "They're going to be okay, better than okay." Coleman said he was wrong. He said they have so much potential, so much possibility. Grace started crying. The boys, confused, but sensing the emotion, clung to both of them. "I told you," Grace sobbed. "I told you they weren't unreachable." "You were right. You were right about everything." They held each other on the floor of the living room, 4 people bound together by something stronger than blood, a family. That night, after the boys were asleep, Marcus and Grace sat together on the back porch. The stars were out, scattered across the sky like promises. "I have something for you," Marcus said. Grace looked at him curiously. "What?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "Marcus, you can't. We haven't even. It's too soon." "I know the timing is crazy." He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring that caught the starlight. "I know we've only been together for a few months. I know there are 1,000 reasons to wait. Then why aren't you waiting?" Marcus looked at her, his heart completely open. "Because I wasted 4 years waiting to feel again, waiting to hope again, waiting to live again. I'm done waiting, Grace. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to raise those boys together. I want to build something beautiful out of all this broken mess." Grace was crying too hard to speak. "I'm not asking you to replace Sarah," Marcus continued. "No one could ever replace her, but I'm asking you to stand beside me, to help me honor her memory by loving her children with everything we have, to be my partner, my best friend, my wife." He paused, his voice breaking. "Will you marry me?" Grace stared at the ring, then at Marcus, then back at the ring. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, and Grace threw her arms around him, laughing and crying all at once. In the window behind them, if anyone had been watching, they would have seen two small faces pressed against the glass. Liam and Lucas awake past their bedtime, watching their father and Grace embrace. Liam turned to his brother and signed quickly. "Grace, stay forever now." Lucas grinned and signed back. "Grace is our family now." Both boys cheered silently, their hands clapping together in celebration. Their father wasn't the only one who had found his happy ending. The engagement sent shockwaves through Marcus's world. His business partners were baffled. A housekeeper, really his lawyers were concerned. "Have you considered a prenup?" His mother, whom he rarely spoke to, called for the first time in 3 years. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" Marcus handled each conversation the same way. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The wedding was planned for spring, exactly 1 year after Grace had first walked through the Bennett mansion doors in her yellow dress. It would be small, intimate, just family and close friends. Rosalie flew in from Louisiana to help with preparations. She took one look at Marcus and nodded approvingly. "You'll do," she said. "But if you hurt my granddaughter, I'll make you regret the day you were born." Marcus laughed. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The twins followed their soon-to-be great-grandmother everywhere, fascinated by her stories, her cooking, her endless patience. "They remind me of Grace when she was little," Rosalie told Marcus one afternoon. "Same curiosity, same stubborn determination, same big hearts." "She saved us," Marcus said quietly. "All 3 of us." "No, baby." Rosalie shook her head. "She showed you how to save yourselves. There's a difference." 2 weeks before the wedding disaster struck, Marcus woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of coughing, terrible rattling coughs that made his blood run cold. He threw off the covers and ran toward the boys' room. Grace was already there, her face pale with fear. Lucas was sitting up in bed, struggling to breathe. His face was flushed, his small body shaking with each cough. "He's burning up," Grace said frantically. "His fever, it's too high." Marcus scooped Lucas into his arms. The boy was limp, barely conscious, his breathing labored and wrong. "Call 911, now." The next hour was a nightmare. The ambulance, the hospital, the doctors speaking in urgent voices, the cold, sterile waiting room where Marcus paced like a caged animal while Grace held Liam, both of them trying not to fall apart. "What's wrong with him?" Marcus demanded when a doctor finally emerged. "What's happening to my son?" "Lucas has pneumonia. It's aggressive, but we caught it in time. We're starting him on antibiotics and respiratory support." "Will he be okay?" The doctor hesitated. That hesitation nearly broke Marcus. The next 24 hours are critical. His immune system was already compromised due to some underlying issues we discovered in his blood work. We're doing everything we can. Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. Underlying issues. Compromised immune system. The words echoed in his head like a death sentence. He'd just gotten his sons back. He'd just found hope again. He couldn't lose one of them now. He couldn't. Grace appeared at his side, her hand sliding into his. "He's a fighter," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "He's been fighting since the day he was born. He's not going to stop now." Marcus pulled her close, holding on like she was the only thing keeping him from drowning. "I can't lose him," he whispered. "I can't." "You won't. We won't." Liam tugged at both of their hands, his small face pinched with fear. Brother okay? Grace knelt down and signed carefully. Brother is sick. Doctors are helping. We need to be brave. Liam nodded solemnly. Then he signed something that made Grace's tears fall faster. I pray, like Grandma Rosalie taught me. I pray for Lucas. Marcus watched his son close his eyes and clasp his hands together, his lips moving in silent prayer. This child who had been written off as unreachable was now praying for his brother's life. If that wasn't a miracle, Marcus didn't know what was. The night stretched into eternity. Marcus refused to leave the hospital. He sat beside Lucas's bed, holding his son's small hand, watching every rise and fall of his chest. Grace stayed with Liam in the waiting room, both of them curled together in an uncomfortable chair, neither able to sleep. At 3 a.m, Lucas's fever spiked. The monitors started screaming. Doctors rushed in. Marcus was pushed back, forced to watch helplessly as they worked on his son. His oxygen levels are dropping. Get a respiratory team in here. We're losing him. Marcus couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. He thought of all the time he'd wasted, all the years he'd spent hiding from his children instead of loving them, all the moments he could never get back. And now, Lucas might die without ever knowing how much his father loved him. Please, Marcus prayed, though he didn't know who he was praying to. Please don't take him. Take anything else. Take everything I have. Just don't take my son. The minutes stretched into hours, and then just as dawn began to break, Lucas's fever broke too. The doctor stepped back exhausted, but relieved. He's stabilizing, the lead physician said. The antibiotics are working. He's going to make it. Marcus collapsed into the chair beside the bed, his entire body shaking. Lucas's eyes fluttered open. He looked at his father, confused, weak, but alive. Papa! The word came out as a whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. Marcus couldn't speak. He just leaned forward and pressed his forehead against his son's tears streaming down his face. I'm here, he choked out. Papa's here, and I'm never leaving again. When Grace and Liam burst into the room moments later, they found Marcus still bent over Lucas's bed, still holding his hand, still crying. Grace didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around both of them and held on. Liam climbed onto the bed, carefully mindful of the tubes and wires, and curled up beside his brother. Lucas signed weakly. Miss me. Liam's face crumpled. He signed back frantically. Never scare me again. Never, never, never. Lucas managed a tiny smile. Promise. The wedding was postponed. Marcus didn't care about the deposits they lost or the vendors they had to reschedule. His son was alive. Everything else was insignificant. Lucas spent 2 weeks in the hospital, recovering slowly but steadily. Marcus never left his side except to shower and change clothes. Grace split her time between the hospital and home, making sure Liam didn't feel abandoned during the crisis. Rosalie extended her stay, taking over the household with quiet efficiency. That boy is strong, she told Marcus during one of his rare breaks. He gets it from you. Marcus shook his head. He gets it from Grace, and from Sarah. I'm just the one who almost lost him. Almost doesn't count. Rosalie patted his cheek firmly. What counts is that you're here, right here, fighting for your family. That's what fathers do. The day Lucas came home was the happiest of Marcus's life. They decorated the mansion with balloons. Grace made his favorite meal. Liam had drawn a banner that said, "Welcome home, Lucas," in crooked letters. When they carried Lucas through the front door, both boys started crying. But these were happy tears, healing tears. Marcus gathered his family close and made a silent vow. Never again would he take a single moment for granted. Never again would he let fear steal his joy. Never again would he forget what really mattered. The wedding was rescheduled for autumn. It was smaller than originally planned, just 20 people in the Bennett mansion garden. But it was perfect. Grace wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers instead of roses. Marcus wore a suit that had cost less than his usual dry cleaning bill, and he'd never felt more comfortable. The twins served as ring bearers, walking down the aisle together, their small hands clutching velvet pillows with matching concentration. Rosalie sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. When Grace reached the altar, Marcus took her hands in his. "I wrote vows," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I'm not going to read them." Grace tilted her head, curious. "Because everything I want to say, you already know. You know I love you. You know I'm grateful for you. You know that you saved me and my sons from a darkness we might never have escaped." He paused, collecting himself. "But there's one thing I need to say out loud in front of everyone who matters to us. One thing I need the world to know." Marcus looked at Grace, then at his sons, then back at Grace. "I was dead for 4 years. I just kept breathing out of habit. You brought me back to life. You taught me how to hope again, how to feel again, how to love again, and I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to deserve you." Grace was crying now, but she was smiling too. "That's all I ever wanted," she whispered. "That's all I ever needed." The minister pronounced them husband and wife. Marcus kissed his bride, and somewhere watching from a place beyond pain and loss and fear, Sarah Bennett smiled. Her boys were going to be okay, all 3 of them. The first year of marriage passed like a dream Marcus never wanted to wake from. Every morning he woke to Grace beside him. Every evening he tucked his sons into bed. Every moment in between was filled with the kind of ordinary magic he had once believed was reserved for other people. The boys flourished. Liam's vocabulary expanded until he could hold real conversations in sign language. He developed a passion for drawing, filling notebook after notebook, with pictures of his family, their house, their life together. Lucas, fully recovered from his illness, became the mischief maker of the household. He delighted in pranks and surprises, in making his father and brother and stepmother laugh until their sides ached. Both boys started at a specialized school that fall. On their first day, Marcus and Grace walked them to the entrance together. Liam turned and signed nervously. "What if the other kids don't like me?" Grace knelt down and cupped his face in her hands. "Then they're missing out on knowing the most amazing boy in the world." Lucas tugged at Marcus's sleeve. "What if I get scared?" Marcus smiled and signed back. "Then you remember that your whole family loves you, and that we'll be right here waiting when school ends." Both boys squared their shoulders, took deep breaths, and walked through the doors together. Marcus watched them go, his heart swelling with pride and terror and overwhelming love. "They're going to be fine," Grace said, slipping her hand into his. "I know." "Then why are you crying?" Marcus laughed and wiped his eyes. "Because I almost missed this. I almost missed all of it." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. "But you didn't. That's what matters." The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus was in the kitchen attempting to make Grace's grandmother's gumbo recipe a disaster in progress when his phone buzzed. He didn't recognize the number. "Hello? Mr. Bennett. This is Principal Morrison from Bay Area Academy." Marcus's blood ran cold. The boys. Something was wrong with the boys. "What happened? Are they okay?" "They're fine, Mr. Bennett. Please don't worry." The principal's voice was calm but serious. "However, there was an incident today that I need to discuss with you. Can you come to the school? I'm on my way." He left the gumbo burning on the stove and didn't look back. The drive took 15 minutes. Marcus made it in 8. He burst through the school's front doors and was immediately directed to the principal's office. Grace, who had received the same call, was already there. "What happened?" Marcus demanded. Principal Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s, gestured for him to sit. There was an altercation during lunch. Another student, a boy named Tyler, was making fun of Liam and Lucas for being deaf, using slurs, mocking their signs. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Liam tried to walk away, but when Tyler pushed Lucas, Liam retaliated. He hit the other kid. He punched him in the face, broke his nose. Marcus sat back, stunned. Liam, quiet, gentle, artistic Liam, had broken another child's nose. "Where are my sons now?" In the nurse's office, Liam is being treated for a cut on his hand. Lucas is fine, just shaken. Grace stood up. We need to see them. Of course. But Mr. Bennett, I have to be clear, we have a zero-tolerance policy for violence. Liam is facing suspension. Marcus felt something snap inside him. Suspension. My son was defending his brother from a bully, from hate speech, and you want to punish him. I understand your frustration, but no, you don't understand. Marcus's voice rose. You don't understand what those boys have been through, what they've overcome. You don't understand that my son has spent his entire life in silence, fighting to be heard, fighting to connect, fighting just to exist in a world that wasn't built for him. Grace put a hand on his arm. Marcus. And the first time he stands up for himself, the first time he protects his brother from cruelty, you want to punish him? Marcus was shaking now. What message does that send? That he should just accept abuse, that he should let people mock him for something he can't control. Principal Morrison's face softened just slightly. Mr. Bennett, I sympathize with your position, but I have to follow school policy. Then your policy is wrong. The room fell silent. Grace stepped forward. Principal Morrison, may we please see our sons? We can discuss consequences after we've made sure they're okay. The principal nodded slowly. Down the hall, second door on the right. Marcus stormed out without another word. Liam was sitting on a cot in the nurse's office, his hand wrapped in gauze, his face streaked with dried tears. When he saw his father, he burst into fresh sobs. Marcus crossed the room in 2 strides and gathered his son into his arms. I'm sorry, Liam signed frantically. I'm sorry, Papa. I know hitting is wrong, but he was hurting Lucas and saying terrible things, and I couldn't just stand there. Shh. Marcus held him tighter. It's okay. You're okay. Am I in trouble? Marcus pulled back and looked into his son's eyes. Listen to me very carefully. What you did was brave. You protected your brother. You stood up against cruelty. I am proud of you. Liam's eyes widened. But the principal said, I don't care what the principal said. I care about what kind of man you're becoming. And today, you showed me exactly who you are. Grace appeared with Lucas, who immediately launched himself at Marcus and Liam, joining the embrace. Tyler said we were broken. Lucas signed, his small face twisted with confusion. He said we shouldn't be allowed in regular school. He said we were stupid. Marcus felt his heart shatter. You are not broken, he said firmly, making sure both boys could see his signs. You are not stupid. You are perfect exactly as you are, and anyone who says differently is wrong. But why does he hate us? Liam asked. We never did anything to him. Grace knelt down beside them. Some people are afraid of what they don't understand. And when people are afraid, they sometimes become cruel. It's not about you. It's about their own fear. Will he always hate us? Grace smiled gently. Maybe one day he'll learn better. But even if he doesn't, that's his problem to carry, not yours. The boys nodded, their expressions still troubled but slightly lighter. Marcus stood up and faced Grace. I'm not letting them suspend Liam. I know. I'll fight this. I'll get lawyers involved. Grace put her hand on his chest. I know, and I'll be right beside you. The battle with the school lasted 3 weeks. Marcus hired the best education attorney in California. He gathered statements from witnesses who confirmed that Tyler had been the aggressor. He threatened to go public with accusations of discrimination against deaf students. In the end, Liam's suspension was overturned. Tyler was transferred to a different classroom and required to attend sensitivity training. But more importantly, the school implemented new policies to protect students with disabilities from harassment. You did that, Grace told Marcus the night the news came through. You changed things for other kids, not just ours. We did it together, Grace smiled. We make a good team. The best. He kissed her, and somewhere in the house he heard the twins giggling. Life was good. But Marcus should have known that peace never lasted forever. The letter arrived on a rainy Thursday. Grace was sorting through the mail when she saw the return address and froze. Marcus. Something in her voice made him look up immediately. What is it? Grace handed him the envelope with trembling hands. The return address read, Wilson and Associates Family Law. Marcus tore it open, his heart hammering. The letter was from Sarah's parents. Mr. Bennett, we are writing to inform you of our intention to seek visitation rights with our grandchildren Liam and Lucas Bennett. Despite multiple attempts to maintain a relationship with the boys following our daughter's passing, you have systematically denied us access. We believe it is in the children's best interest to know their maternal grandparents. If you refuse to cooperate voluntarily, we will pursue legal action to enforce our rights. Please have your attorney contact our office within 14 days. Richard and Margaret Wilson. Marcus read the letter twice, then a third time. He hadn't spoken to Sarah's parents in over 3 years, not since the funeral, not since they'd stood in his living room and accused him of being responsible for their daughter's death.
What is it? Grace asked, her face pale. Marcus, you look like you've seen a ghost.
Sarah's parents. His voice came out flat dead. They want visitation rights. Grace took the letter and read it quickly. Her expression shifted from confusion to concern to barely concealed fury. They can't just demand access after all this time. Where were they when you were drowning? Where were they when the boys needed family? They wanted custody right after Sarah died. The memories came flooding back, dark and suffocating. They said I wasn't fit to raise deaf children, that I didn't understand their needs, that I would damage them. They said what? There was a hearing. It was ugly. I won, obviously, but... Marcus shook his head. I told them to stay away. I told them that if they ever tried to contact the boys again, I would destroy them. Grace stared at him. You never told me any of this. I didn't want to remember. I buried it along with everything else from that time. She reached for his hand. What do you want to do? Marcus looked at the letter again. At the formal language, the veiled threats, the assumption that he was still the broken man he'd been 3 years ago. I want to fight, he said, but I'm not sure if that's the right thing for the boys. What do you mean? They have a right to know their grandparents. Sarah would have wanted that, and maybe I was wrong to cut them off completely. Grace's eyes widened. After what they said about you, after they tried to take your children, people can change. Marcus laughed bitterly. I should know. I'm not the same person I was when you first walked through that door. That's different. Is it? Grace fell silent, considering. What if this is a trap? She finally asked. What if they're using visitation as a first step towards something bigger? That's possible, but what if it's not? What if they really just want to know their grandchildren? The question hung in the air between them. Marcus made a decision. I'm going to meet with them, face to face, before any lawyers get involved. Grace's jaw dropped. Are you insane? Probably, but I need to look them in the eye and find out what they really want. I'm coming with you. Grace. Non-negotiable. Her voice was steel. Whatever you're walking into, you're not walking into it alone. Marcus smiled despite everything. Have I mentioned lately how much I love you? Not in the last hour. You're slacking. The meeting was arranged for the following weekend. They left the boys with Rosalie, who had flown in immediately after hearing about the letter. You go handle this, she told Marcus firmly. Those babies will be safe with me. I know they will. Marcus kissed her cheek, and she swatted at him affectionately. Go on now. And don't you dare let those people intimidate you. You're a good father. Don't let anyone tell you different. Richard and Margaret Wilson lived in a stately home in Pacific Heights, the kind of place where money whispered rather than shouted. Marcus remembered the house from happier times. He and Sarah had spent Thanksgiving here once early in their marriage, before the pressures of business and family had driven wedges between them all. Grace squeezed his hand as they walked to the front door. Ready? No, but let's do it anyway. Marcus rang the bell. The door opened almost immediately. Margaret Wilson stood in the doorway, older than Marcus remembered, her face lined with grief that hadn't faded in 4 years. Marcus, her voice was cool, and you must be the new wife. Grace's smile didn't waver. Grace Bennett, nice to meet you. Margaret's eyes flickered with something disapproval, curiosity, before she stepped aside. Come in. Richard is waiting in the study. The walk through the house felt endless. Richard Wilson stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. He had aged too, Marcus noticed. His hair had gone completely gray, and there were deep shadows under his eyes. Marcus. Richard. The men stared at each other across the room. Neither moved to shake hands. Margaret gestured toward a seating area. Please sit. They arranged themselves in a configuration that felt more like a battleground than a conversation. You look well, Margaret said to Marcus, though her tone suggested this was not entirely a compliment. I am well. We heard you remarried. Yes. Rather quickly, some might say. Grace's hand tightened on Marcus's arm, a warning. I didn't come here to discuss my marriage, Marcus said evenly. I came to discuss your letter. Richard finally spoke. We want to see our grandchildren. That shouldn't be controversial. You tried to take them from me. We were concerned about their welfare. You accused me of being unfit. You were unfit. Richard's voice rose. You were drinking yourself to death. You couldn't even look at those boys without falling apart. What were we supposed to do, stand by and watch you destroy yourself, and them along with you? Marcus felt his control slipping. So you tried to steal my children. We tried to protect them. Stop it! Grace's voice cut through the tension. Both of you, this isn't helping. Margaret looked at her with something approaching respect. She's right, Margaret said quietly. We've spent too many years fighting. Perhaps it's time to try something different. Richard glared at his wife but said nothing. Marcus took a deep breath. What exactly do you want? Margaret leaned forward. We want to know our grandchildren. We want to be part of their lives. Sarah was our only child. Liam and Lucas are all we have left of her. Her voice cracked on the last words. Marcus saw, perhaps for the first time, the grief behind the hostility, the desperate clawing need to hold on to something of the daughter they'd lost. I loved Sarah, Margaret continued, tears now streaming down her face, and I blamed you for losing her. That was wrong. I know that now. But punishing us doesn't bring her back, and it doesn't help those boys. Marcus felt something shift inside him. I was wrong too, he admitted slowly. I shut you out because I was scared. Scared that you'd see how badly I was failing. Scared that you were right about me. Richard's rigid posture softened just slightly. We weren't right, he said gruffly. We were angry and grieving, and we took it out on you. The things we said in that courtroom. He shook his head. Margaret was right. We've spent too long fighting. The room fell silent. Grace looked at Marcus, her eyes asking a question. He nodded. I'm willing to try, Marcus said. For Sarah's sake, for the boys' sake. But if you do anything that makes them uncomfortable or unsafe, we're done, permanently. Margaret nodded frantically. Of course, whatever boundaries you need. And you need to understand something. Marcus's voice hardened. Grace is their mother now. Not a replacement, not a stand-in. Their mother. If you can't accept that this doesn't work. Richard and Margaret exchanged a look. We can accept that, Margaret said quietly. Sarah would have wanted them to have a mother. The first meeting between the Wilsons and the twins happened 2 weeks later. Marcus was terrified. Grace was supportive. The boys were curious. Rosalie was skeptical, but willing to give it a chance. They met at a park-neutral territory, public space, plenty of room for the boys to escape if they felt overwhelmed. Margaret had clearly done her homework. She came prepared with picture books about sign language. Richard, stiff as always, had practiced basic signs until he could manage hello and nice to meet you. The boys approached cautiously. Liam signed to his father. Who are they? Marcus signed back. Your mother's parents, your grandparents. Lucas frowned. Mama Grace's parents. No, your other mother. Sarah, the one who gave birth to you. Both boys went very still. They had grown up with Sarah's photograph in the living room, with stories about her kindness and bravery and love, but she had always been abstract a face, in a frame a character in their father's memories. Now, suddenly, She was connected to real people standing right in front of them. Liam took a tentative step forward. Margaret knelt down, her eyes bright with tears. "Hello, Liam." She signed her movements clumsy but sincere. "I'm your grandmother." Liam studied her face for a long moment. Then he signed back. "You have Mama's eyes." Margaret burst into tears. Richard, standing awkwardly behind her, cleared his throat roughly. Lucas approached him with considerably more caution. "Are you sad?" he signed. Richard looked confused. Marcus quickly translated. "He wants to know if you're sad." Richard swallowed hard. Tell him I was sad for a long time, but seeing him and his brother makes me happy." Marcus relayed the message. Lucas considered this for a moment. Then he reached out and took Richard's hand. The old man's composure shattered completely. Grace watched from a nearby bench, her own eyes wet. "That was brave of you," she told Marcus later that night after the boys were asleep. "Opening that door again after everything they put you through. It was the right thing to do." "That doesn't make it easy." Marcus pulled her close. "Nothing worth doing is ever easy. You taught me that." Grace smiled against his chest. "I taught you. You taught me everything. How to hope, how to love, how to be a father." He kissed the top of her head. "How to dance." She laughed. "You still can't dance." "I know, but I try." And that was all any of them could do. Try, get knocked down and get back up, make mistakes and learn from them, love fiercely even when it was terrifying. That was what family meant. 5 years passed. Liam was 9 now, tall and quiet and thoughtful, his walls covered with artwork that had started attracting attention from galleries. He dreamed of becoming an illustrator. Lucas was 9 too, of course, wild and energetic and impossible to keep up with. He had discovered soccer and played with a ferocity that made Marcus's heart both swell and stop. The Bennett mansion had transformed completely. Toys everywhere, art projects on every surface, a golden retriever named Murphy who shed on everything and was loved by everyone. Music played every afternoon, not because the boys could hear it, but because they could feel it, could dance to it, could share in its rhythm. Richard and Margaret came for Sunday dinners now, part of the family, despite everything that had happened. They'd learned fluent sign language. They spoiled the boys shamelessly. They adored Grace. "She's good for you," Margaret told Marcus one evening, watching Grace and the twins play in the garden. "Sarah would have liked her." Marcus smiled. "I think so too." And somewhere in the universe, he hoped Sarah was watching. Hoped she could see how her sons had flourished. Hoped she knew that her love hadn't died with her. It had grown expanded, encompassed new people and new connections and new joy. On the boys' 10th birthday, the whole family gathered in the garden. Rosalie flew in from Louisiana. Richard and Margaret brought presents too big to fit through the door. Friends from school, neighbors from the community, everyone who had become part of their extended family. The twins stood on either side of a massive cake, their faces illuminated by 10 candles each. "Make a wish." Grace signed, her eyes bright with tears she didn't bother hiding. Liam looked at his brother. Lucas looked at him. They nodded once in the silent communication only twins could share. Then they closed their eyes. When they opened them, they signed the same word at the same time. Family. Marcus felt his heart expand until he thought it might burst. This was his life now. Not the silent tomb it had been 5 years ago. Not the empire of isolation he'd built to protect himself from pain. This was noise and chaos and mess and love. This was scraped knees and late-night worries and arguments that ended in laughter. This was ordinary miracles every single day. Grace appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" Marcus watched his sons blow out their candles, watched them dive into presents with unrestrained enthusiasm, watched the family he'd built laugh and celebrate together. "I'm thinking about what you said to me the day we met. That joy isn't reckless." Grace smiled. "I remember." "You were right. Joy is the bravest thing there is." She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." And that was enough. That was everything.
Later that night, after the guests had gone and the boys were finally asleep, Marcus stood alone in the kitchen. He held Grace's old Bluetooth speaker in his hands, the same one that had started it all, the same one that had brought music into a house that had forgotten how to sing. He pressed play. Aretha Franklin's voice filled the room warm and alive. And Marcus Bennett, billionaire widower, father, husband, Marcus Bennett, who had spent 4 years convinced he would never feel anything again, began to dance. Not gracefully, not well, but with everything he had. Grace found him there a few minutes later. She didn't say anything, she just joined him. And in the kitchen, where it had all begun in the house that had transformed from a tomb into a home, 2 people danced in the darkness, not because anyone was watching, but because they had learned the secret that so many never discover. That love is not about grand gestures or perfect moments. Love is about showing up, day after day after day, in the silence and the noise, in the grief and the joy, in all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that make up a life. That is the power of presence. That is the miracle of family. That is what it means to be truly, completely, unshakably alive. And Marcus Bennett, who had once believed he was beyond saving, knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man in the world. Not because of his money, not because of his empire, but because a woman in a yellow dress had walked through his door, turned on a song, and danced with 2 little boys who couldn't hear the music, but felt every beat of it in their hearts. That was the day everything changed. That was the day the silence ended. That was the day Marcus Bennett finally came home.